Welcome to the very fifth episode of BriightCast Season 2. Today we talk about the power of unifying a brand through visual identity and more insights from inside a visual marketing agency. And who better to talk through that with than Briight senior designer, Ben.
Great. I get to be on one finally.
Well, Ben, tell us what exciting things you've been working on.
Well, we've got some new branding projects going on at the moment. Some quite interesting ones. We've been looking at some clients that have already got a bit of design already. They've all got some logos and things, and we've been developing them out a little bit.
Yeah.
And then we've been looking at some other clients that have got absolutely nothing at all. And it's an entirely new company. So we're helping build them from the bottom upwards, which is always a really exciting thing to do. And it's great to be in there at the very start, because then you can sort of put your mark on things and you can sort of start to make decisions, and any decisions that they make as well, you can sort of have a bit of an influence on, which I think is really important. Yeah.
It's nice to probe them as to find out what's important to them, the clients, and the core of their business that's coming up. And then just using that as a jump off, really. I always also find that people are pretty open to exploration in this.
Yeah, definitely. When they haven't got something already that they think is precious and they don't want to change, or someone internally says, oh, I really like that, and someone else doesn't.
It can go two ways, that can, because there can be some where they're just totally frustrated with their own performance or the company or the stagnation or something like that. And they're just like, we need to rebrand. We need a whole new visual identity. But you do get some where there's a bit of caution, and probably they're right to be cautious about changing too much too fast.
I think caution's a good thing, but also you've got to be brave.
I was going to say, I think some of my favourite projects we've worked on are companies that probably already have a brand.
Yeah.
And we've made such an impact with the refreshes we've done to like their website and their visual identity. It's made such a splash in the area and the industry that they're in. Yeah. Just looking at the before and after of like websites compared to like UX and the design of the website compared to what
we've had to challenge them to get there.
Yeah, definitely.
And sometimes it's nice if people are a little afraid.
And the results are always worth it though.
Well, what's the point in doing something if it doesn't scare you a little tiny bit?
Exactly.
You're supposed to do something every single day, aren't you, that scares you a bit? So whether that might be a crazy logo, or you might be doing some interesting marketing, or using some colours that you wouldn't have thought, hey, hang on, I don't think that fits with my brand. But
there's been some clients where we've pushed them out of their comfort zone a little bit with their branding, and they may think that it's not right for them straight away, but then they sit on it for a day or so, and they come back and say, actually, this is the right move for the company. We do need to try something different and be a little bit scared of what we're doing.
My big thing is challenging people to be ambitious. They're the most interesting people to work with. Yeah. Because, they've got the ambition. And it doesn't mean, in this sense, I mean the ambition to sort of take their brand and their visuals to be iconic and actually achieve those, the same status within their industry. So it's not like global recognition, but within their industry, the same sort of status as, the more recognizable McDonald's, Coca-Cola and stuff. But we'll get into that. Jess, what have you been on?
This week, kind of linked to Ben, has been heavy on web projects. So over the past few weeks, we've been onboarding a lot of new web projects. There's a few that have come to a close, a few new ones that have started with new visual identities, or even just refreshers, or they just want a new website because their UX isn't working for them. And sort of working through them where it's like timelines and looking through designs and getting them over to our developer. And a lot of testing, a lot of trying to break a site to make sure it's sort of fit for purpose and everything's exactly how we want it and exactly how we imagined for our clients. It's something I enjoy, but something that can be quite stressful at times.
You always see sites at different sort of stages of development.
Yeah.
And I guess when you've had so much experience with them, you know that some sites at this stage, even if they're buggy, they can be quickly resolved, all of them.
Yeah.
And then some where they feel like they're quite close can just drag and there's like difficult fixes or just fixes that, take up a little bit of effort and time.
Something that we're getting ready to put live. We're sort of working on ads for those as well. So alongside web projects, we've also been onboarding some new ad clients. Yeah. Getting those ready, keyword research.
Yeah.
Raring to go.
Yeah, we don't really do any websites without all that stuff to serve them, do we?
Yeah.
Because that's why we're doing the website, because often people have come to us for customer journey stuff and we've looked at it all and, it needs improving.
Yeah,
so that's cool. And I've been I've been riding the rail a lot these past few weeks. I've been stuck on trains. We had a meeting in London, strategy meeting, you and I, and then the day before it was London South Bank for a shoot, but it was there's no parking, there's no nothing, so we trained it with loads of gear, and that was an absolute nightmare. And interrupted with delays, and I'm still just tired. So
the reason we brought Ben on the podcast was to talk about visual identity and the importance of visual identity for a business. I want to talk about what visual identity actually means for the listeners that don't know, and how unifying it actually benefits a company more than people realize. Yeah. And with it, we might touch on other branding elements, but we're trying to focus on the design elements and the visuals. So, Ben, a nice, succinct definition of
a unified brand. It's all about getting everything sort of working together in a cohesive way and looking consistent across everywhere you're applying your brand. Yeah. So, I mean, we spoke about this a little bit on our mini podcast a while ago. Yeah. And it's about making sure no matter where you put your brand, it always feels the same. Yeah. So you're using consistent colors, you're using the right logos, you're using the right tone of voice as well. Which is really important. It's not just the visual, it's the messages that go along with it. Yeah. And how you present those messages. Yeah.
I was going to say it's everywhere as well. Like people don't realize it's like from blog images to PR that you put out and like social images. It's literally everything your brand touches needs to feel like your brand.
Yeah. Exactly. And companies use tone of voice. Like if you read something from Oatly, you know it's from Oatly. It's got their personality dripping definitely. In it. Yeah. But I'm really interested in the visual side of things, obviously, visual marketing agency. And I like to challenge people that we work with to push for that sort of instantly recognizable visual identity wherever they are within their industry. But it can be, we've done it with a few companies now where I think we've achieved that. And there's some that we're still working towards, but some we've definitely achieved it where people have commented to them saying, I know when I'm on my feed, that's your post.
You shouldn't have to put a big shouty logo on an image to say this is our brand. You should know already. Yeah. It's the styles, it's the colours, it's the way things are presented. Yeah. It should always feel like it's a part of the same group.
I guess one of the biggest mistakes people make is it's a bit mismatched.
I was just about to say you see it most frequently, I think, when people are hitting that growth spurt as an SME. So there's not just, say, 5 of you in a business where one of you might create that content. Yeah. There might be 20, 30, 40 of you, and 10 people might be creating content at different times. You might not have a fully fledged marketing team or work with an agency. Yeah. Might still be directors and CEOs and managers creating content for sort of sales and marketing, but none of them are aligned. You might even be able to see what content people have created. Like if that was you could see what content Ben's created and what Rod's created and what I've created, and it should all look the same no matter who creates it.
I think sometimes it's not a bad thing if you create content for a platform. Just for example, like you're putting things on Reels and you're putting things on Instagram, and it has to be fast, quick content. Yeah. But then you go back to tone of voice and you make sure that your tone of voice is right across all your content. So visually, you might not be able to put that flair and that color on just a quick video. Like, we're on a shoot today. Here we are. Check us out. Yeah. You can't get those graphic elements in there, but you still know it's the same brand because of the way it's being shot.
It's it's the captions, isn't it? It's the copy that goes alongside it, or even if it's a quick shot and you don't have to post it there and then, and you can add little things on it. For us, it might be our squiggles or a little bright here or there, or our captions, for example, are our colours. So a business could have little elements that are their brand. Yes, without it being just sticking their logo in the corner to make it look
little visual flourishes that are on brand. That just brings it together. Because I think that's the danger of saying this piece of advice where you're saying everything should feel part of the same family is people can interpret it that as you can only use these colours. Yeah. It's always this.
You don't want to be repetitive either, though.
You don't want to be repetitive.
It's such a difficult balancing act to be fresh. And there's, a client that we've worked with quite a lot over the past few years. We have certain motifs with them. Yeah. But we've done so many different variations on those different visuals that it is always fresh, but because it's got that element in it, you know straight away, oh, it's that company. I recognize that.
That client in particular, we've probably created 100 assets for them over the year, maybe even more.
And
like we've created so much.
They all seem fresh, don't they?
If you put them all next to each other, they all look different, but they all have the same brand feel. Everything looks unified.
Yes.
You can tell it's the same brand, the same identity, even down to sort of tone of voice, the messaging on the images, the colours and everything. But recently we've had sort of a refresh with those colours.
Yeah.
So not necessarily introducing new brand colours, but it might be a different season
campaign
or different
colours
campaign or slowly bringing in different colours for those things without harming the brand itself.
Yeah. It's about having the right guidelines in place for each of those areas.
Yeah.
And I think to be able to create a brand that you can use across all different platforms and that does work together really well, you've got to have a really good initial brand guidelines. And you've got to have someone, either an external agency or someone internally, who's that brand guardian, who's in charge of making sure when the brand is used, it's consistent. Now, big companies, like I was looking at Audi's brand guidelines, they have a whole website devoted to what you can and you can't do with the brand. And you can download all the assets on there. So anyone internally within the company goes, okay, I'm not really sure how I can use this piece of content. Right, I can just jump on the brand portal and I can read through and I can download exactly what I need.
Yeah.
So everybody knows what can and can't be done.
When we've worked with done some work with the BBC, they've got a similar thing, and they've got things like I don't know what they call it. We call it brand in motion when we're doing it. And it's how things should animate or move. And they've got it with a few presets for their logos, how to animate them. Yeah. But it's guiding principles really on how much you can stretch certain areas of it and things like that. They're all guarded by those brand guardians, sorry.
You mentioned having sort of a strong sort of visual identity pack, sort of brand guidelines. I think it's also important to have the room for adaptation on it as well. And it's needs to be sort of controlled, sort of the adaptation you're taking from it.
But it needs to have room to grow. Do you know, there's nothing worse than when you work with really big companies and they have such strict brand guidelines that there's actually no movement. And you can say, this is still on brand because we're still using the colours and fonts and everything and it's the right tone of voice. But they'll say, well, it's got to be 4 pixels smaller than that. Or something really ridiculous. And it just sometimes needs to be left to grow itself.
There's a great marketing campaign that I saw, it was months ago, maybe even a year ago or so, where McDonald's are creating some billboards and it was their packaging with some chips in it, like the chip box with some chips in it. Yeah. And it was like a cartoon type vector drawing thing, but had no mention of logo on it, had no slogan on it. I think it had some text at the bottom, sort of like for when you're hungry or something. No mention of the brand, but you immediately knew it was McDonald's. Yeah. You immediately knew it was that brand and what it was sort of getting you to think and feel without it being like, oh, this is McDonald's, come and eat over here.
And all of that's built on many years of sort of consistency and doing the same sorts of things. And that's kind of what you've got to build for your brand. You've got to build the consistency and creating all the content all over the place. It's never going to work.
You mentioned fonts, and fonts are an area I think people don't give enough attention to.
Definitely. With
their brand and specifically on how they can differentiate. Yeah. I feel like everyone sort of, not now, but maybe 10, 15 years ago, they started to look at Apple with their clean sort of font, and everyone was going that route. And, you know, it's a real opportunity to stand out and quite an easy way of unifying your brand and getting that consistency across. And I think even if it's quite a flourished, elaborate font as your sort of font one, let's call it, you can back it up with a more straightforward secondary font. But I think people need to be thinking about their fonts a bit more.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's how they use their font, which is really interesting. You might only have one font. Yeah, but you've got different weights and you use things to accentuate different words, and you can italicize, you can bold, you can make things bigger. Yeah, motion graphics is a fantastic way of using fonts. I love motion graphics with use of fonts like kinetic typography. There's some fantastic adverts using that.
There still needs to be rules though, don't there? Yeah, because you don't want to use every weight
No.
just randomly.
No, there needs to be purpose to what you're doing. And it needs to also, again, it needs to be consistent.
Yeah.
So whenever you do a certain thing, you do it again next time.
There needs to be a reason, like you say, a reason for it. So it might not necessarily be a strict, this is only when we use light, or this is only when we use bold.
Yeah.
It's thinking, why am I using this font here? And why am I choosing to make it bold or to make it light or to make this italic? And like, why is that a thing I'm doing?
Yeah.
And is it adding value? Are you drawing attention to a word?
Adding value, I think, is really important, because a lot of times people will put things into a brand, or they'll put things into an image or whatever they're doing, just kind of for the sake of it.
Yeah.
It needs purpose. It needs a value. And definitely with type and typography, do you need 3 fonts? Do you need 2 fonts? Can you just use one? Do you need something to look a certain way? Can you just use something that's a bit more on brand?
Yeah. Copy is such an undervalued sort of technique, and it definitely is getting more credit nowadays than it ever has. But especially the use of copy and then typography together. So when you get the copy for the asset, how can you bring that to life? How can you make people feel a certain way when they're reading this? Like, what do you want to draw attention to? What message do they need to be taking away? It might be 3 sentences on this image, but the call to action is only one of them. So that's what you want to sort of make them leave with.
Okay, let's move on to some visuals then. So the actual like imagery creation. And if we look at something like vectors and where they could crop up. So there's iconography on websites and things like that. There's vectors for like explainers, or you might do animations with vector graphics. How do you make them different? How do you make them unique to you and stop them being, just blending in with everything else?
I guess it'd be looking at sort of the core principles of your brand. So iconography obviously can be any color, any color and sit anywhere, basically. So if you strip all the color away from it, how does it still look like your brand? If you have triangles, for example, as a main sort of shape, how can you make iconography from a triangle? How could you incorporate that into that?
Well, on the recent web outlays and things, what's sort of your thinking process with that, Ben, when you've been going through it, looking at icons and stuff?
I think it's looking at, like Jess was saying, what kind of shapes you've got within the brand. So taking the logo, what font have you used?
Yeah.
Really important. What other fonts are you using? What colours are you using? What kind of, how can you take those shapes and that feel? And should you be using a solid icon? Should you be using like an outlined icon? Yeah. What kind of vector shapes will fit really well with what you've already got? Because sometimes I think it can jar when you've got quite a modern, sleek looking icon next to a serif font that looks quite sort of like vintage feel to it.
Yeah.
It's not
People
going to
have
work
gone for
together.
a retro feel.
So if you've got modern looking typography, you've got sleek imagery, you want to make sure that the icons you're using just fit and they're just they're coherent with the rest of the brand.
Your reasoning came from looking inwards, so it's looking at your own company and your own branding as you have it, and then making your decisions from there. But should people also look at competitor things and competitor things in terms of where they can totally differentiate or disrupt, what's within their industry?
Definitely. You've got to know what your competition looks like so you don't make the cardinal sin of copying their branding.
Yeah.
Because if they're established and you start using the same colours or similar fonts or just similar sorts of styles, you're inadvertently sort of advertising for them at the same time. Because consistency, people will see it and go, oh, is that company X?
Yeah. And the whole point of visual identity is so you don't get that brand confusion, right?
Yeah.
So that you're never confused for anyone else. It's you and it's yours thing.
Something I'd recommend to sort of a company that is sort of looking for a brand refresh or a startup looking to create their brand for the first time is don't look at competitors or people in the industry or people you aspire to be like. Do some research maybe around Shutterstock and Pinterest, and create a mood board of things you like, the ideas you like, the branding you like, fonts, colours, typography.
Well, that way it's going to be authentic, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you're not accidentally copying for a start.
That's
which
the
is
main
really
reason.
bad.
Yeah.
And you're also making sure you're differentiating because it's more natural. Yeah. And it's what you actually want to be.
I think you can explore one direction with it as well. And then you can be like, oh, but I also like this thing and this could be relevant. So you can explore that and create a mood board there. And it might be that when you've created those options, then you look at competitors.
I was just about to say, once you've got the mood board, you can then look at competitors, and if they're doing a similar thing, cross that bit off.
Yeah.
Say that's not for me, or I don't want to be too close to them. So I'll explore this thing instead.
It might even encourage you to go in the opposite direction as well.
The main reason is we've had clients come to us before. It's like, we love this because our competitors doing it, or even they do
the
it.
industry leaders doing this. Let's just copy it.
Or people don't know they're thinking it because of a competitor. Like they've done so much market research, setting up their business. Then when it comes to the design thing, it's I really like this like icon or this brand thing or this color or this shape.
You just develop like an accidental bias almost, don't you?
Exactly.
To the stuff you've just
I
been
think
seeing.
There's a lot of bias that I see when I'm looking through things like LinkedIn, where you have certain companies and that whole cloud of companies all use the similar color palette or they use the similar things. Yeah. And it happens a lot in the industry. Certain companies tend to automatically go towards a certain color. So there are a few suppliers like telecoms, for example, a lot of them use blue. Yeah. Now, Vodafone differentiated. They went with red. You've got things like O2 and you've got BT. It's all using similar sorts of colour palettes.
Well, Orange, by their name, I know they're not really around anymore, but Orange were just to disrupt with. We're just going to be called Orange. We're going to use Orange.
But that's crazy to say. Orange either got acquired or turned into E, didn't they?
Yeah.
And went from Orange, which differentiated themselves, back to blue again, that kind of
like
sat within the market.
And there is a trends thing, isn't there? Like teal was big for quite a while, and it's still around in a lot of things. It's a nice colour.
But let's move on a little bit to how people can build a unified brand. So let's talk about both. There's kind of two areas businesses can currently be in. We spoke about a little earlier. There could be a startup not having a brand completely. They're looking at creating a logo and their brand from scratch. And then there's also the ones that haven't quite set their business up right in terms of their visual identity.
They've developed fast. You see it with a lot of fast scaling businesses where they've just had to have a business. They've had to have and then some brand.
They have to backtrack and go, oh, hang on a minute.
Yes.
We create this logo just as we started because it'd be a placeholder.
Now we've got 100 employees. They're all doing different
We've
things.
had it for 5 years. We need a bit of a
so someone that might just have a logo, a font available on Word, and maybe a few colours they've thrown at it.
I guess the first step is identification, right? So you look at the customer journey and everywhere they're going to see you.
Yep.
And then start identifying the mismatch. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. You've got to evaluate what is already there. Obviously, the businesses that are starting afresh, the only way to know what's already there is to look at competition.
From a strategy point of view, obviously you guys are coming from a visual view there. From a strategy view, I'd say step back and look at the brand you want to create. Yeah. So even before you look at the visual stuff, it's what words come to mind, what words do you want other people to think of, and there's an activity we like to do with clients where it's like, are you this or that? Yeah. Like, are you
more Chihuahua than Labrador?
Yeah, are you a ski holiday or a beach holiday? Like little things like that, where it's like comparisons of what you want to be or what you think you are or what you want to grow into, and then look at sort of where you are now. Especially if you've already got a brand. For the startups, it'll be starting from scratch, so where you want to be, and then you can work with that. Yeah. But just a little step before sort of diving into the visuals, I think, is worth mentioning.
Yeah, and that's a great, I think, preliminary step for those people with a new brand that's coming up. And it's like we said earlier, like look inwards first. What's important to you personally for your company, but then look at the competition and the differential and the opportunities there.
So after identifying sort of the change you want to make, sort of what you've currently got, what would you say after that, Ben?
From the identifying what changes you want to make, normally it's a case of we want to refresh what we've got. We want to build something new. It's kind of two options.
Yeah.
Do we want to start with an entirely new brand? If we're starting with a whole new brand, it's sort of looking the very start of what we normally do is we look at the logo first. Yeah. Because that's where everything sort of evolves from. Yeah. That should be the center point of of all of your branding, where the color palette comes from.
Yeah.
It should influence what kind of fonts you're going to be using. It needs to pair well with the type of imagery you're using. Is it vectors? Is it photography? Is it something a bit more abstract?
It sets the baseline, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like if your logo is corporate because you're corporate, the brand then will be corporate.
It's going to flow from that, isn't it?
If it's a bit more fun, maybe there's an element that brings it a bit more corporate, then it'd be kind of split throughout. Like it kind of creates that baseline of the visual identity.
What kind of color palette does it work with as well? Is it like with our brand, our logo can work in any of the colors from our color palette. Yeah. It's bright on purpose.
And that's in our brand guidelines. Yeah. Some companies won't want it to be in every color. Exactly. They might have 5 colors, but they only have their logo in black and navy.
But I do think it's a modern touch to do that and allow for those use cases and different use cases. And you don't know where your company will be in 5 to 10 years. So if you've got those use cases, left open, let's say, then you can still do that. And what's surprising, I think, to a lot of people when they talk to us is there's only a few cases where we've totally redone a logo. I think a lot of the time it's just about a little update. Or it's a
refinement, isn't it? Sometimes you can see from the outside something that's obvious that someone internally doesn't see. Yeah. Like we took a couple of logos recently, and it was just little touches. It was changing the colours to make them a bit more vibrant, so that they stood out a little bit better. Same sort of palette, but it was just more vibrant. In other cases, it was just a case of refining the shape of the logo. Yeah. It felt like it was crudely done. It was it was like we said previously, a logo that was created quickly because it needed to serve a purpose. Yeah. Well, now we're looking to make it so the logo is actually part of the brand. It's not just something that's been done because they needed it. It is the brand. It's the center point.
I would always recommend people when they're looking at their own logo to think about all the places you use a logo now. So what we like to do is, there might be like a linear horizontal one, but how does it look stacked? What about a square profile? Yeah. We've run into a few instances where on a big logo, you might have 2 pixel circles, but when you actually condense that to profile size, they just become pixelated because they're less than a pixel width and stuff like that. So it's what do you have a secondary shorter logo that is just for profile pictures, for example? Yeah. And I think it's good to think about those use cases for
during the brand refinement. It's essential to look at those use cases as well, because it's a brand we work with and they've kind of created so many use cases. So it's like in this element we use this logo, in this element we use this logo, and there's still that room for creativity, but they've thought about use cases. Yeah. It's like when it's on a small document, we stack it here, or when it's on a larger piece, we use the full logo, or we might have a condensed logo for certain things. And it's definitely looking at those use cases, because some people that create a logo at the start and then rapidly grow, like you say, they're just quickly creating a logo so people know it's them. Yeah. Whereas
and
now
use
it's time
that logo everywhere, won't they? Yeah. And it just won't work. And you'll look at it on LinkedIn and go, why have they got a long logo on that box? It's cropping off at the sides.
That's right, yeah.
Or you see it then in print and it's so small that you can't read it.
Yeah. Or you jump over to Instagram where it's still predominantly 1:1 or 4:5 format.
Exactly.
Like and it just doesn't line up. Yeah. And beyond the logo, I think it's about what imagery you're going to use. So everyone's marketing in a visual way now. So what do you do with your photos? Do you always black and white?
Is it photos?
Is it overlay?
Is it something else?
Photos? Do you default to vector or, drawing?
Or something completely abstract? Is it, do you not have static imagery? Is everything in motion?
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of room to be creative at this point. This is where you start to take a brand and make it into what it's going to be.
Yeah.
And it can be really daunting if you don't know quite what you are yet.
Yeah.
And this is the point where you really need to think, like you were saying earlier, go and do your research. Go have that mood board of things that you like.
Yeah.
Even if it's things that are in completely different spaces to where your company is working, if you've seen something that you like and they like the way it works, can that influence?
That's even better. If you look outside of your industry, outside of work, even for influences on things that align with your company and what you're thinking.
This goes back to being a designer. You've got to always be designing. You're always looking at stuff. Wherever you go, you see architecture and you go, "Wow, look at the shape of that. Can we use something like that?" Yeah. You look at. You're watching TV, you're watching adverts, you're seeing how they're putting things together.
Yeah.
You're picking up even junk mail that comes through the letterbox. I always like to look at and go, what have they done here? How have they designed that?
Yeah.
And like even silly little things like the local magazine in the town I live in.
Yeah.
And you look at what they've done and how they presented it and what they've used and what color palette and why they've used that color palette. Is it relevant to the place? Is the font, because you've got local people looking at it who might be a little bit older, they might find it harder to read. You've got larger sizes, all this kind of stuff. You've got to always be looking at what's around you and how that can influence your design and your creativity.
You have once people have an idea of the sense of imagery and the things they like, how do you bring it together and put it across everything?
I think you've got to start looking at how you treat those images and how you bring that typography in, and whether you think you need to put logos on everything that you're creating.
If anything,
exactly.
No, like you don't.
Exactly, you don't need to. You don't need to, because your brand should be obvious from the outset.
Maybe when you first rebrand, it might be beneficial to have your logo somewhere, just for the first maybe couple of months, just while people are recognizing the brand, recognizing the changes you're making.
Yeah.
But your branding should speak for itself without the logo.
Yeah. So once you've got all these different elements, you've got your new logo, you've got your new font that you've paid $200 for. Yeah. You've got all those different elements. You bring it together and you create your brand guidelines. Yeah. And you've got within that document, or however you want to present it, it might be a website. It might even be physical. There's something quite cool and tactile. I've not seen a physical brand guidelines in a long time.
Yeah.
But you've got that asset that tells you how to use the brand, and it doesn't have to just be the visual elements, like you were saying. Yeah. It can be the tone of voice. It can be how you sort of where you use the brand. Yeah. What kind of things you do on each of the platforms, and also when. When should you be creating these posts? Do you post stuff on weekends? Do you post it during weekdays? Is that something that should be in a brand guidelines?
Yeah, potentially.
I think there's a lot of different questions on what should be in it and how to present that, and then who has guardianship over it.
It needs to be a one-stop shop almost.
Exactly.
Like, as soon as someone new joins,
as a book.
Yeah, as soon as someone new joins, they should be able to read this guidelines, like this book, and know exactly what the brand is, what colours they should be using, where they should be using it, what imagery they should be using, how they should treat it.
You should be able to take this book and go and give it to a designer or someone and say, make us some content. Yeah. It'll have the correct tone of voice. It'll be on trend for what you've created. And it won't feel like it's been created by somebody else. It's got to feel consistent.
Yeah. And done right, it won't be restrictive.
No, it won't be restrictive. It should allow creativity, which is something that we always say as a business ourselves. We want people to be creative. We want to encourage people to be creative. And a brand guideline shouldn't restrict creativity. It should allow creativity. It should enable it. It should be there to say, look at these cool things that we've done. And you should look at that and go, I really like that. I can't wait to do something similar to it, but put my own spin on it.
Yeah. Or even you can push it as far as you want to push it and be like, oh, okay, so if I did this element in this way, that would align it with the brand. Yeah. And so it will feel, even though it's completely different to, whatever we did over here on Facebook, it will still be the brand.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A good activity for people to do as well is, once you have this brand guideline, is maybe even take some of the old posts you've already created and recreate them with the new brand guidelines. Look at creating new content. The more you use your brand guidelines, the more, one, you'll get to know it, 2, it'll become easier, and 3, you'll notice any gaps in it. Yeah, it might be, it's too restrictive, let's adjust it slightly to be
You've
this.
You've got to use it to understand how it works. Because I think we've done that with a few of the companies that we've worked with recently. We've developed new brand guidelines, and we've only realised how to use those guidelines, even though we've created them, maybe a month or 2 into the process.
And I would say that's probably as far as you want to go, maybe up to 3 months, something like that, because otherwise, if you have this rule of it, you should be able to evolve it as you use it. But if you have this rule of we can always evolve it, you don't have brand guidelines anymore. You're just doing anything you want to.
Do you know what? With our Briight brand guidelines, I think because we're so particular, and being a visual marketing agency ourselves, we always want to make sure we've got everything perfectly right. It took such a long time to get to a point where we thought actually, we can just create content with this.
Yeah.
And now
Yeah.
I've created some pieces recently where I've gone, actually, I do know how to put this together now because I've done enough with it that it should just be second nature. Yeah. And the problems you have are when you've got a brand and you actually don't know how to use the guidelines and you're not sure what you can and can't do.
A mini plug here. We've got an ebook sort of around this topic that you've done, and it looks different to everything we've done, but definitely feels on brand.
Yeah.
You've done some new different design things using these motifs.
Yeah.
And that work amazing. So well done.
Thanks.
But it is different to what we've done before. Yeah. But it feels part of the family still. So that's the true objective, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
I think with us being a creative agency as well, there's that added extra pressure,
of course,
to be super, super creative with everything you do. Yeah. So when you're doing creative things for other companies, as you feel like, we can do this. This is great. This is great. Then when you're doing it for yourselves, it's like, oh God, where do we start? Yeah. Like, we've got to make this better and bigger and better. Not that we don't want to make things bigger and better for all the clients we work with, but when you're doing something for yourself, it just becomes.
If you're doing it for a law firm, it's easier to give them a visual edge over other law firms, for example. Yeah, no, I get that. Well, I think it's a good point to bring it back to the benefits of all of this.
Yeah.
Why is it worth people putting this time and effort into unifying their visual identity across things?
I think if a potential customer or client recognizes your brand straight away and understands who you are and what your tone is and what you're looking to sort of achieve as a brand, they're going to have so much more trust in you as a company. Yeah. They're going to have more recognition of what it is you do. They're going to understand who you are as a brand. Yeah. And it's just going to make that process of getting them on board with whatever it is, the service you're providing, much, much quicker. And I think in a smooth way and more enjoyable for the customers as well.
I think even before that, from an awareness point of view, it's touch points as well, isn't it? Because they're going to see your brand in so many different places, really, before they make contact.
My main thing is, especially if you're using so many different channels for your marketing, it's important even if you're only using one, like LinkedIn, for example, but especially if you're doing like display ads, LinkedIn ads, social media marketing, you've got a website, you're doing email marketing, like there's so many touch points that you're putting out to people.
Even if you think you're only using one social media thing, because it's website and everything, you're actually using loads.
If everything looks different, one, no one's going to associate the stuff you're putting out together. So they might think, oh, this newsletter is different to this post, different to this website. And two, it is that trust element. If they click on a display ad that looks one way and then goes to a website that looks different, downloads an ebook that also looks slightly different, then gets an email that looks completely different, follows you on LinkedIn, looks nothing like your stuff. There's no fluidity there. There's nothing to keep them on board, to keep them on track with.
They might enjoy all of those different posts or materials separately, but there's no attribution for you as a company, and it doesn't improve brand recall or anything like that. When they're
brand recall is such an important element of all of this. Yeah, you want someone to recognize you. This is the whole point of this. If someone can recognize who you are straight away, then your job is done. Your brand's working.
And my plea to people is to push and be ambitious with this, because you can. I think not enough people are doing it in any industry. There's not enough people going for iconic visual status. And I think there's a real opportunity for you to do that. And you'll start reaping the benefits very quickly. Yeah. Nice. Great bloody app, guys.
Yeah, it's been good to have Ben on.
Yeah.
Thanks. Nice. It's been good to be here. I mean, I'm filling, I wouldn't say big shoes, but a big chair.
Yeah.